also to talk about a case where we actually use this to turn around a company. And from all the companies that I worked with, since this is Hubli, I've picked this company in Hubli where we used this thinking long back. It's 25 years ago, and how we were able to turn things around, right? When we actually started in somewhere in 1993, we had to actually shut down the company because we had no orders at that time. And because we had absolutely no orders, we shut the company down. We were already doing something which I will explain to you and as the slides come on. But we had to sit down and rethink what to do. How are we going to turn the situation around? And how are we going to bring this company back, into the number one position, or the market leader? So there were a lot of questions that faced us at that time. We looked at what's happening in the industry, what's happening to us. We looked at the competition in the industry. We looked at what is likely to happen or what can happen. The government policies were changing at the righties. The liberalization had come in. Barriers were being removed, which were in the form of duties earlier. So if those barriers were removed, then what will be the scene of our company going to be different from what it was? And if it is going to be different, where are we going to face threats from? Who is our potential threat? How are our competitors reacting to this change? What are they doing or what are they likely to do? Will our products that we are producing, will they continue? Will they survive? Or, will the product itself become obsolete? The very process that we work on which supports our products, is that going to become obsolete? So there were a lot of questions that were facing us. And we had to find answers to all of this. So what we did, we actually did this study in 3 different parts. And it was quite a comprehensive study we did. We didn't have too much time, to do this. One of the things we did is we undertook a very large market survey all across India, as well as, we did it to some extent overseas, outside India. We went and met maybe more than 10,000 actual users of our machines, and we asked them this question fundamentally: why are you not buying our machines? At that point in time, there was a recession that had set in across the world, and this recession was pretty bad. So everybody, at that time was saying, it's because of the recession that we don't have orders. But I had a very different thinking, and I used to always say there is no such thing as recession. And really there is no such thing as recession, I did not believe in the market slowdown, even though there was market slowdown in terms of global consumption. But the question I asked was, what is our size in the global consumption? We were so small and so minuscule that even if you took away 50% of the global consumption at that time, we were still so small, and the opportunity to go and increase that market share was simply so huge and much more than, the recession itself. So there was a different way of looking at things. And when I started looking at it like that, the mind does some amazing things. It starts to build your thoughts in those directions, in those lines, trying to find those solutions. Because basically, we were looking at the possibility, We were trying to become possibility thinkers instead of being impossibility thinkers. So we looked at, like I said, we did this study in 3 parts. We looked at our competitors, and then we wanted to develop a competitive strategy. And like I said, we are already working on something. We wanted to, get that to become stronger. And we had to make strategic decisions, to be there. I will show you very quickly what these 3 are. Are you familiar with this? This is called, the wheel of competitive strategy. So we had to define our goals, right? And these goals had to be defined in terms of 2 things. One is in terms of money, goals in terms of finance, in terms of turnovers, profits, etc. And the other was non-financial goals, which was more, the human side the technology side, and all of that. So we had to define these two goals, and we did. One of the things we said was, now this is working with a closed factory at our back. We said we have to be the number one in the marketplace. And so that was a goal. Translated in terms of money, we had set certain targets in terms of turnovers that would yield some surplus money or savings or profits, whatever you want to call it. And these goals had to be then translated in each working area of the organization, each department. Remember, I told you that the goals of the organization and the goals within each working area of the organization have to be synchronized. So an organization can have various departments, and that's how we formulated our key operating policies. Yeah, we already were working on technique called as just-in-time. And just-in-time manufacturing, today, it's called lean manufacturing. But since we were working on just-in-time, we had already seen the advantages of just-in-time over conventional manufacturing. And the advantages were really very, very big. And so we wanted to use that as a base strategy to build, our competitive strategy on, to gain competitive advantage in the marketplace. We looked at, important factors. We actually sat down and did an exercise of our strengths and weaknesses. We actually wrote down our company, our unit, what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses. We also wrote down what are the values that each one of us as a key implementer, has, because these values play an important role. We looked at the opportunities that, that were ahead of us. Like I said, even though it was a terrible bad recession, I always looked at it that we have a huge potential for growth, and we were in an absolute hurry. So the word recession did not really threaten us. And we said, today, if we are in a very, very small market share globally, then all the market that we don't have is potential market that we can acquire from our competitors. And so we went based on that. So we looked at all the opportunities that were there. We looked at what threats we are likely to face in this process, because, if we can do something, our competitors can do the same. Okay? So we had to be able to do what we wanted to do before our competitors could do it, or we had to do something that our competitors would find it difficult, to actually copy us or imitate us or do the same thing. So these are called they were the internal factors. These are, the external factors that played a role. So we did a very, very thorough exercise, writing these down and understanding what these are, because it actually gave us an insight and led us to our further decisions. When we set these goals, the question was, are these goals achievable? Because, the kind of goals I had set were very high. Most people thought they were not achievable. But the difference was that the way I saw the opportunity was different to the way everybody else saw the opportunity. So I really very, very strongly believed that, these goals were achievable. The next thing was to make sure that all our policies addressed achieving these goals. We had to be able to achieve these goals. And it was important to make every single policy, process, method, thinking, in our operations aligned to be able to achieve these goals. So we did all this. We looked at environmental fit, right? We looked at the opportunities, like I said. We looked at, the threats. So when we did this, and then we started to ask more questions. The first, question is like, what is the business doing now? So what were we doing now? We were just producing a set of products that we had inherited maybe from the mid-70s. And we continued to produce these products. We had not changed the products. We had not even addressed whether the markets were happy with these products or the markets wanted, a change or anything like that. We asked this question, what's happening in the environment? What are our competitors doing? Competitors not only in India, but competitors outside India. We largely considered our competitors outside India as our competitors more than competitors in India. We looked at what's happening in the environment. There was very little happening in the domestic environment in India in terms of any advancement, barring the fact that machines were being made intelligent with integration of CNCs. But then again, there was such a huge gap between the type of equipments that were produced in India to the type of equipment that were required by most of the buyers in India. So we looked at this. And the third question we asked was, what should our business be doing now? Good question to ask when you have a closed factory. And so we said, what we should really be doing, in terms of a mix of products, in terms of markets where we should be, in terms of, we addressed emerging markets, we addressed mature markets, we addressed where we already were. We also addressed where we had never been, where our products had never been sold. So we did, all of this, and we basically did a lot of thinking as to what should our business be doing, both in terms of products, technology, people, absolutely everything. What kind of competitive advantage should we be working on? Or what if we do, will we have that advantage which will help us compete better compared to our competitors, right? And so what are the strategic choices we have to make in the process? We had to make a lot of choices, some very difficult choices. All of this generally, is also called penetrating analysis, because this study has to be done to a great amount of depth. Now, when we looked at the forces that were driving our industry, you see, the scene was changing in India at that time with the liberalization. And we had seen a lot of companies from low-cost manufacturing companies like Taiwan, like Korea, Spain, etc., sell a lot of machines in India because the barriers had changed. The government had changed the barriers by changing the duty structure. We then were also studying how our competitors are responding to this change. So we had to do an analysis and find out who are going to be the potential new entrants likely to come into our market. So we asked this question, are there going to be potential entrants coming into India? That means new competition. Did we have to face new competition? New competition could be new technology, new products, okay? New price structure, right? So we could be in combating different areas. So we did a very, very detailed analysis of this potential entrance. And then you see, one of the reasons why we do an in-depth study and analysis like this, or this entire process, is once we do this, my thinking was that my company should be protected for the next 8 to 10 years from the onslaught of any competition, any threats. Should be protected, capsuled or encapsulated, okay? So that for the next 8 to 10 years, the company could have a smooth sailing, continuously growing, easily being able to ward off any threats, okay? We also looked at, to do that, what kind of product range would we need to support this? Because the products form a part of the strategy. How are we going to address our customers, our market? And we asked some very critical questions here, Are my products going to become obsolete? The answer was yes. Is this process itself, the process that our products supported, which was conventional machining, would this process become obsolete? The answer was yes. So these were two great threats that we had to combat also. Then we have, we have our customers on one side, people who buy our equipment, and we have suppliers on the other side. And both these people, we yield their own power. The buyers yield their own power. The customer yields his own power. The supplier yields his own power. So if a customer is a potential customer who buys a large number of machines, then he becomes, he's considered as a very important customer. And therefore he will sit and bargain. What will he usually bargain for? It's always the price and feature matrix. He'll either ask for something more to be put into the equipment without, charging him for it, or he will bargain for the price. The worst would be they would bargain for both. So this is, the power that a buyer would wield, So we had to combat this, and we did this in a very, very clever way, I would say. I'll get to that slide later. And then we had suppliers. Actually, we had some suppliers who were actually controlling us. They were actually controlling our cost, and they were therefore controlling our ability to compete in the marketplace. So we had to nullify both of this. And I will show you in a while how we did that. Now, these are some of the, major ways that you can look at barriers to entry. Economies of scale. If you have good economies of scale, usually what happens is you have a lot of people coming in. Product differentiation, capital equipment. See, I will get into all these details one by one. We also looked at the retaliation that can come from the market. Who will retaliate? Now, when we do something in the market, when we change the rules of the game, putting a competitive strategy in the marketplace is also changing the rules of the game, the way the game is played. And when you change the way the game is played, what happens? It causes a disruption in the market. And when it causes disruption, what happens? People who are already there, they are likely to retaliate. We looked at what possible retaliation can be there, who will retaliate, how, etc. One thing was, I was pretty certain that from our domestic competitors, I did not really so much worry about retaliation, because I knew that by the time they realized what had hit them, 10 years would have gone by. The other was my international competitors. And I believed, my international competitors were always a jump ahead of us. Okay, that's a good thing to believe, because that will lead you into doing a lot of right thinking. In the machine tool industry, usually, if you see the growth of the machine tool industry at that time in India was really, really slow. So when the growth is slow, chances of people retaliating is much less, because it's not a very attractive place, right? So when the industry grows at a very high pace, that means it's very attractive to be in that business, and people can retaliate very quickly, very seriously. When you look at potential competition or threats coming from external markets, that is international markets, then we started thinking, how can we, put up a barrier? How can we make the entry more difficult or unattractive for them? And there are, two things to think of. One is the differentiation, and the other would be the cost factors. Now, differentiation at that time in terms of technology would not have been big, because what we could do, anybody else could do. Cost was another factor. If that barrier is strong, then it's difficult for somebody else to enter, because it becomes an unattractive entry for him, especially in the machine tool industry, where initial investments are very high, and if somebody has to come in and make that very heavy investment, and his returns are not attractive enough, that itself is a deterrent for somebody to enter. Large economies of scale, that means if the market provides a scope where you can make a lot of these products, you probably can make them at a very attractive cost. But if that scale is not good, it's small, what happens to the cost? Considering the heavy amount of investment that one has to put in, it becomes unattractive, right? Because it's just not manufacturing, it is every other thing that a manufacturer needs to set up. That is the distribution system, the servicing system, support system, etc. Everything means there is a cost component to it which needs to be provided. We looked at the intensity of rivalry that existed, among the competitors. The intensity of rivalry that existed from my competitors outside India was, much more than the intensity of rivalry from my domestic competitors, right? Domestic competitors, we thought, was easier to compete with than the international competitors, because in the international markets, we had competitors who had excellent products, who were able to manufacture very, very competitively, good quality, and very acceptable prices. Okay? So that was a difficult part to crack, actually. If the price competition becomes very high, what happens? Does it become attractive or unattractive? It's usually not very attractive when the price competition becomes very high, unless you have very, very high, extremely large scales to compete on, right? Now that was not the scene in the machine tool market or in the machine tool industry. So we looked at what potential intensity would be there from these various markets. We looked at who could make different moves, who could make the first move. Yeah. We also looked at who could be potential leaders tomorrow in this market. Basically, it was boiling down, to trying to identify who do we have to ultimately beat to be the number one in this market. This, led us to analyzing what would be our strategic stakes in this entire, putting this competitive strategy in place. And we also looked at, what could be the biggest barriers we had to break. If we could address some of these, then, our strategy would move to be a success. Now, if a competitor is entering into our market, a new competitor, not only did we look at what can we do to make his entry difficult, but we also analyzed if he wanted to exit afterwards. Was it easy for him to exit, or was it difficult for him to exit? You see, a lot of people who want to enter a market and test a market want to have an easy exit option. If the exit is easy, they wouldn't mind moving forward and taking the risk if they see a potential in it. But if the exit is going to become difficult and they are not completely certain about succeeding, then that itself works as a deterrent. So in the machine tool industry, there are a lot of specialized assets. The equipments are very special to produce machine tools, and that's a very high cost of investment. Then there are fixed costs, because one needs to come in, get a foothold, and build his market. And so there are, other factors that play a role. So we looked at all of these factors, and the government policies were changing. So we actually tried to visualize a scene which would come if there would be no duty barriers at all. Then how would the competition be? Okay? Because we said that's the ultimate scene we will have to compete in, the ultimate global scene where there are no tax barriers. In the machine tool industry, this factor of maturity plays a role, both in terms of products maturing as well as markets maturing. Mature markets always have a different kind of demand in terms of products and whatever the product is able to give them. So we had to do a lot of thinking of how are we going to address these markets, because we had, on one side we had mature markets to address, and on the other side we had markets where we had never been, we had never sold an equipment before. Those markets were different, they were not entirely mature. So we had to address, a very diverse kind of situation, right? If the business yields low stable returns, is that an attractive return or not attractive return, right? That's not an attractive return, so the entry barrier would be high. But if the business yields high stable returns, that's an attractive business to be in, which means entry barriers would be low, right? And if the returns are low and risky too, that means you may get returns, you may not get returns, right? What happens then? Is that an entry barrier? High or low? That's a high barrier, okay? And if the, uh, you know, if the risky return, high barriers and risky returns means what? Your exit barriers are high or barriers are low. Yeah. So, so we looked at, some matrix like this. This is basically a matrix, barriers and profitability. Okay, we looked at this in terms of returns and barriers. We also looked at what could happen with substitute products, assuming that our own products are going to become obsolete, or our products will be made obsolete by substitute products, other products that would take over what our equipment could do, right? After all, our equipment was used to produce certain parts and make certain assemblies. So if there was another way of making those parts and that process was more attractive, then we were simply out. Okay? So we looked at the various kinds of pressures that could come in from these substitute products. Like I said, we had to look at bargaining powers of our, buyers and suppliers. How does one deal with a buyer power? You have a very strong customer, and the customer is capable of buying a lot of your machines. And if he's capable of buying a lot of your machines, he's going to beat you down on the price. And if he beats you down on the price, you won't make money. Now, why are you in business? To make money or not to make money? Yeah? to deliver certain value to the customer, which would also yield certain returns. Okay? That would be satisfactory for all the stakeholders. Okay? So we had to look at this. And there was a very nice way we found to do this. The first thing we did was we used what we were already doing. That was, we used the just-in-time as the backbone. We had already worked on becoming so productive. We had reduced our cost to a very, very great extent. Reduced cost, okay? Not cost cutting. We had not cut cost, we had reduced cost. You know what's the difference? See, cost cutting is an accountant's way of understanding cost, because an accountant has got certain headings under which he lists down cost. And if he sees a reduction in any one of those headings, he calls it cost reduction. Actually, it is not cost reduction, it is cost cutting. Okay? So if you have salary bill as the biggest bill and you have got 500 people working, that constitutes the salary bill, and if he thinks that he has to reduce cost, he will chop off 100 heads and say I've reduced the cost. That is called cost cutting. Cost reduction is, in spite of increasing costs which are not within the purview of the organization, whether it is raw material cost, whether it is man cost, power cost, fuel cost, whatever costs, all costs that the organization cannot control, if these costs still keep going up, you still reduce your overall cost. And that is called cost reduction. Okay? How we did that and what thinking we put behind it was the just-in-time technology. Okay? The just-in-time thinking. Today it's called lean manufacturing, lean management, lean thinking. Okay? So understand this. This is the difference. Now, when we did this, our costs had come down to a great extent. Not only that, when we did this market study that I mentioned to you earlier, and we did a Pareto analysis, how are you going to analyze what 10,000 or more customers have actually told you, given you a feedback? How are you going to, take this into account? So we simply put all the feedback through a Pareto analysis, and it gave us only one simple answer, that we had to scrap all our existing designs and we had to develop new designs. Now, machine tools is a funny business. You can develop new designs, but your new designs have to fall in line with the same global specifications. And the specifications of our earlier machines and the specifications of our new machines had to be broadly the same, but this had to be new designs. Okay? So when we did this, compounded with the fact that we had worked already on cost reduction, we had reduced so much of cost that we were able to reprice our products, new products. Remember, that had the same specifications as the old products, but they were all new designs, new products. So the customer got, the same spec product, but now at a 30% lower price. Okay? This was not a discount, but this was repricing our products. Since the products were new, they were newly priced. This is one thing we had done. The second thing we had done was we had also got very good at capturing the cost for our product. And we were so sure that this is the exact cost of our product. And we had actually built a new set of prices with an acceptable margin of price. And the policy that we set behind this was that our margin is going to be reasonable. Everybody, within the organization accepted it. We didn't want to go lower than that. So we said we'll build a price that if a customer doesn't want to buy it at that price and wants to negotiate, we will shake hands and say maybe we'll meet another day, or we can have a cup of tea, but then you can buy any other machine that you want. Okay? That might sound a little bit like arrogance, but that's actually, we actually built that. And for the first time in the history of machine tools, I think anybody built a price and circulated it to customers and said, take it or leave it. Okay? So that was the second thing we did, which also meant what? Whether you buy one machine from me or whether you buy 1,000 machines from me, you get the same price, right? That means what? I treat all my customers the same. Whether you buy one machine, you're still my customer. You buy 1,000 machines, you're still my customer. Okay? One of the things we did after this was we put together a set of policies, a set of marketing policies. I think we wrote down 9 policies, if I'm not mistaken. And all of these 9 policies were like, they were guiding our entire marketing force, what actually to do. They didn't have to come back at all with any question. These policies answered everything by themselves. And so that is how we actually broke down, the buyer power. We still kept getting, customers who would buy repeat machines and lot of machines, etc. But then at the same prices. Then we had suppliers, and we had some suppliers who were actually controlling us to a great extent. And I will give you 2 examples. Actually, there were many suppliers who were playing different kinds of roles that controlled our ability to deliver. One of the first things we did was we reduced the number of suppliers. We had about 179 suppliers at one stage. We brought that number down to 33. Okay? That was one thing we did. The second thing was we identified those suppliers who were really a real threat to us. And 2 examples that I can give you. One was the people who supplied us bearings. In machines we use very high precision bearings. And these are really very, very high precision bearings. These people used to supply us these bearings at an exorbitant cost. And exorbitant cost meant what? It meant our ability eventually to compete in the marketplace was limited. So one of the actions we did was we replaced all of these bearing suppliers. We had, a certain number of them with direct supplies from factory agents from outside of India. We started to import this directly. And in spite of importing, the impact of cost was, I was now buying bearings at 10% of the price that I paid before. So we saved 90% in this process. Okay? The other place where we had, suppliers playing a tricky role, controlling us, was in our sheet metal components. And this also had another reason, the ability of, the supplier itself to produce the increased volumes that we wanted. And so we went around and we found solutions to this by finding alternate sources actually, people who would actually agree to behave in accordance with our demand. In the JID system, there is a pull system. I'll not get too much into that, but it's a basic way of thinking how we convert stationary inventory into a flowing inventory. Inventory needs to flow. Consumption through the year will remain the same or go up. It will not reduce. So each time we would buy small quantities does not mean our purchasing ability or quantity has gone down. Okay, it remained the same or it even improved through the year. So we found solutions to this, and then we neutralized, the supplier power, because we had to ultimately get the controls within us, within our organization, right, to be able to, achieve the goals that we wanted to achieve through implementing all these strategies. There are largely three generic strategies that are talked around in this particular subject. We, looked at what can we do, what can we adopt as our generic strategy. And it's very funny because many companies, either differentiate themselves with technology, make their product so different to the competition, and that is called differentiation. There are others, who would simply make their product so low cost, and that would be attractive to certain markets. That's cost differentiation. And yet there would be those who are very focused, niche, specific segments, right? So, and those markets can be small, specific segments, but then those players just play in those segments because they are happy with what they do, they are happy with the returns they get there. Now, when faced with this, we said we have to do something that is different, and different in what way, okay? We said we have to differentiate ourselves using the differentiation strategy. We have to be different to the rest. That means we should do something that the competition is not going to be able to do, at least in the short to medium term. We have to be cost-wise so effective that even with this differentiation, the customers will find our product far attractive, and better than our competitors. So we put this dual generic competitive strategy into play, actually. So what we did was, what was our differentiation? Our differentiation was, see, our product was simple in technology. There was no, very big high funda. People in machine tools would know this. So we knew that part of it. We could not do any magic or, jump 10 floors up there. But we said there is something we can do. And that something we could do was, with the speed with which we could build, the accuracy with which we could build, the quality consistency with which we could build, okay, no variability in our products. All this meant that we would eliminate so much of waste, so much of unnecessary from our processes. That would actually reduce the cost and make our products more cost competitive compared to any of the competitors' products, right? So our low cost strategy was not merely cutting the price or reducing, just giving a discount. No, that was not what it was. So it was pretty well thought of, and today I can say it was very well implemented. I also had a great team. I think I had probably the best team anybody can have. And that actually made this possible. So when we hit the market with this, what happened to our competitors? Our competitors did not know what hit them. From a situation of no orders, in less than 6 months' time, we were flooded with so many orders that we actually did not know how to execute at one time. You remember this? Yeah? So what had we done? Like 10 years later, somebody wrote in that book, Blue Ocean Strategy, making competition redundant. We had actually made the competition redundant. So the chairmen and managing directors of my competing companies actually came. They came to Hubli. They came to meet me just to tell me, and they said, Sanjeev, you can't sell your machines at this price. You will lose money. So this was what they came to tell me. And on the other hand, my accountant used to tell me every quarter that you please tell the managing director, before I send him a quarterly report, I would have already checked it many times, because my MD always asked him to check it 5 times. He sent it back to him each time because he could not believe, probably, the amount of money that we were making. Okay? So that was the success of this strategy, the whole thing coming together, right? When you look at cost-based strategy, there is a risk in cost-based strategy. Okay? Usual cost-based strategy, if it is just targeted towards reducing cost or working on just slim margins, etc., or price discounting, then anybody can do this. Anybody can do this, okay? Unless it is supported by a better thinking behind it, and the way the cost advantage is got makes a lot of difference, right? The threat, also a threat in the cost based strategy is when you just try to sell a product at low cost, it would make an impact eventually on your balance sheet. That means you would not get the kind of returns that you would expect, or you would have to make good with lesser amount of returns, okay? So there are a whole lot of things. I've listed it down here. You could, get a copy of this and look at it. Yeah. One of the risks in the differentiation strategy is if your product is very highly differentiated and you have a competitor whose product is low cost, chances are that you will lose even though you have a better product to a lower cost product, okay? There are a lot of very high price sensitive markets which will opt for that lower price, and so you will lose out. So this is always the trick, to balance between these two so that you don't lose on any account, yet you gain the advantages of both, okay? And that is exactly what we tried to do, and I think we succeeded to a large extent. The focus strategy is basically trying to work in a niche market, very specialized product. Like if you have got a laser machine which is used to do some surgery on the human body, you can't take that and do something else. It's a very specialized, focused kind of market, right? So basically, that's what I mean. So that's a very different sphere altogether. That's a very different technology. That's a very different different kind of market that you would be addressing to. So it's a different strategy. We also did an analysis of our competitors. This is roughly the framework of our thinking, what went behind it. Like I said, we wrote a lot of things down, okay? What drives our competitor, right? And we identified our competitors, we wrote down who are our competitors, domestic competitors, international competitors, and then we tried to answer all these questions, okay? Not that we had all the answers, but to an extent, whatever we knew, whatever we could find out, we did that. We went and asked a lot of people, asked a lot of questions, and whatever we got as information, feedback, answers, etc., we tried to put that into this. We tried to understand what are the future goals of our competitors. What are they going to do next? What are they planning over the next 5 years to do? What is their immediate next thing? Are they working on any new product? What's happening in their design and development? Are they designing a new product? Okay, are they modifying an existing product? What's going on there, right? So we looked at all of this, and we also looked at what the competitor is doing now and what he can do. Has he got more potential than what he's doing now? Can he do something more? Will that be a threat to us? Will that affect us? Will that impact us? Will that disrupt our strategy? Will that disrupt our growth? Will that disrupt what we want to do? Okay, so we looked at all this. You can call this as competitor's response profile. So we tried to develop a response profile. We made various assumptions in the process. We looked at various capabilities, in this, and we tried to draw a picture. At any point in time when we do this, we do it to the best of the information that we have, the ability that we have, based on the information that we collect, etc. And if that information is not correct, is not accurate, then it could lead to wrong conclusions. So we tried to do a fairly thorough job of this, and I think eventually we got this act right. So having done this, now it was time to set our future goals. And we said, where we want to be, what are our goals? We said, when you start from a closed factory, your turnover is almost zero. And so we said, we want to be a ₹1 billion company in so many years. And to a lot of people, it was almost unimaginable because it had never happened before. And the belief, the conviction just was not there. And that was coming from the past experience and the history, right? But history is always history, it's always past, okay? Past is past. Past does not have to be your future. I said, it doesn't matter what we have done or not done before, but here is what we can do. And developing a competitive strategy, that's the very purpose of how you want to do something entirely differently compared to what you were doing before. So we put this, business unit goal in terms of our turnovers, in terms of profits, in terms of, human resource, in terms of equipment that we'd need, investment that we'd need. A lot of things come into that matrix. And when we put this into that matrix, we developed the future goals that we would, aim or strive to achieve. And we set a very ambitious goal, to do from zero to do a billion rupees in 7 years. And I can tell you, 3 years later, when I left the organization, those 3 years we were bang on target. We had actually set targets for 7 years, and we actually did those levels of, those financial goals were met. Okay. Before we actually roll the strategy out, we also tested our assumptions, because there was a lot of assumptions we had made. If this happens, this is what we'll do. If this happens, this is what we'll do. And we assume things, this is how things are going to unfold, and therefore this is how we are going to do things or behave, right? So we looked at the competitors' assumptions. What would the competitors be assuming, right? Whether the overseas competitors would like to come into India and sell machines. And one of the things that I had done, right or wrong at that time, since I knew a lot of them myself, I had actually told all of them how they are going to be uncompetitive if they ever think of coming into India. I don't know if that did play a role to a certain extent, because nobody actually came into India after that. Then, you actually plant seeds of doubt in the minds of competitors, which I did in this process. How in their own assumptions of what can happen if, they want to enter into India. And I gave them kind of a idea as to what would be, the difference they would have to bridge in terms of cost, because technology levels were almost the same. Not only did we test our assumptions, but then, I also tried to put some seeds into the assumptions that I thought which competitor would probably be making, and create a deterrent to this. So we were using all of this. We were able to formulate our strategy, our entire working strategy, how we would work through the organization, aligning, the key operating policies of every department with the goals of the company. A big subject to get into, details here, but then it has to be, it's something which has to be meticulously done, because the key operating policies of every department just don't need to sit in a book as an operating policy. They need to translate into the behavior and routine of every single person in the organization or in that department. Okay? Then only it begins to work mechanically. So we had to do this. We did this. Looking at capabilities of our competitors was probably one of the last things, and it kind of was to bring to a closure about all this, on all this study we did. Here we look at, is a competitor potentially capable of coming into our market, coming into our product range, even if he is not existing there at present. So we looked at a lot of these things, the timing it would take, if he would want to come, and the kind of financial resources that would go in, and so many things, right? It is just, it's an exercise that we did which was necessary to reinforce that whatever strategy we had put together was going to sustain this organization for the next 8 to 10 years, or longer, until they would have to redo this again. So the result of all of this, putting this entire competitive strategy, working on, competitive advantage, Are you familiar with this matrix? This is called the product portfolio matrix. Now these are the dog products, and dog products are those products where you don't make money, and they are the worst kind of products. So you basically want to, what strategy do we apply here? We apply exit strategy for these products, right? So we exited out of these products. Then we had a set of cash cows. The company made money on these products, but these cash cows were outdated in terms of, technology. They had outlived their life and they needed to be changed. Then we had actually opportunity, right? And a new series of machines were already developed and were being produced. They were actually the opportunity space, but there was something wrong with them. The company could not entirely remove these and run with this, okay? And so what we finally did was, what is this called? Yeah. So this is where the future opportunity actually lies, right? So we developed a new series of machines. We call them turnmaster lathes. We developed a new series of enterprise lathes, okay? We developed a new sets of CNC lathes, okay? I think eventually we got to 3 models there. And then we developed a lot of machines, contract manufactured them in Taiwan. They were made to our spec with our logo on it. And these were the machines that we were not producing so far. We did not have the capacity inside, but we had the capacity to sell them, right? So we developed a lot of these, and we got them into India and we sold them a lot. So this was what we did, and this remained to be the final product mix that we were producing. So what happened in this process? Our sales turnover went from 0 when we had closed to, or from the best we had ever produced in terms of turnover, 500% growth we had in 3 years. We made a lot more profit than ever before. Mr. Ramakant can tell you a lot about this. We cut down throughput times. Wherever we took earlier 30 days or 45 days to make something, we were now able to make it in 1 or 2 days. So can you imagine the kind of reduction? We reduced a lot of our inventory. Our inventory turns used to be about 1.5, and then we eventually went very close to 18. And we did not actually target to remove people, but people opted to leave through schemes. And so we had about 840 people. Eventually, we came down to 640. So about 25% manpower reduction, no additional manpower, and no additional outsourcing, okay? So we were able to do all of this by productivity improvement inside. So whenever productivity improvement takes place, what happens is cost reduces automatically, quality improves automatically. Yeah, and there were a lot of other things that came with this, right? So if you do an analysis of industry attractiveness, now our business position, we were the number 1. We had come back to number 1 position, okay? We were now the market leaders. We dictated everything. Industry attractiveness, very high. In whichever way you would look at it, very, very high. So this is how we actually, built our competitive strategy, gained competitive advantage, made our competition redundant, turned around, our company, and made it, back to the number 1 position, right?